All right, so Black Myth Wukong just released this week, and whoa boy, has it been a ride. The game came out swinging, already breaking records, reaching a peak concurrent count of 2.3 million players on Steam. And in
this this video came out like a day ago or 2 days ago. Look at this. It still has an over 2 million player peak. That is fucking insane. I think it'll start to go down next week because this is the weekend. So you've got a big buff, right? It's the first big weekend for the game. But the fact that it's held it for even longer than a day is fucking disgusting.
Dethroning Dota 2, Lost Ark, Counter-Strike, and Palworld, it now sits in second place for the highest concurrent player count
was
of
crazy
all
back
time,
then.
behind only PUBG.
Yeah.
So yes, the game is very popular.
It is.
And not only are there millions of people playing, most of them seem to really like it as well. Steam user reviews are overwhelmingly positive with a whopping 96% rating, which is quite high. To put it in perspective, of the top 20 most played games on Steam, there are only 5 other games that have a rating over 90%. Those being Elden Ring, Palworld, Valheim, Baldur's Gate 3, and Terraria. And now Black Myth Wukong making
Never played
it
Terraria,
the 6th. Now, obviously, the game just came out. There's a lot of positive early reviews, and this review score could change over time. But man, with the high concurrent player count and the high review rating, the game is certainly off to a good start. And it's done this in spite...
Somebody says it's Chinese boosted online. So, like, if people from Canada like a video game, does that mean that the video game isn't really actually good? Why is there this artificial distinction between video game players in China and video game players in America? Is it because of, like, a language or cultural difference? Because I don't think that's really very valid. I think we play a ton of games that are from different cultures. Like, look at Nintendo. That's from Japan. It's a Japanese game. Mario, Legend of Zelda. It has nothing to do, like, why, I don't understand any logic to that at all.
Of all the pre-release discourse around Black Myth Wukong's development studio and their oddly specific restrictions for streamers who were given codes, which included not discussing China, feminism, or COVID. Yeah, that went over.
Thank God. That should just be the norm.
Over super well, as you would expect. But despite all of that, we have got the second...
Which, by the way, is just simply them regurgitating the state mandates from China. Has nothing to do with their actual opinions as a game development studio.
Most popular Steam game ever, and overwhelmingly positive reviews. So yesterday, I spent the entire day playing Black Myth Wukong for myself, and I can tell you, I get it. This game is actually quite good.
Snakes that
to
early?
put it precisely, it's just plain old, simple fun with good gameplay. It's relatively polished, and on top of that, has no BS monetization. This is being the, like, rare trifecta.
Yeah, you want to know why people from the West are mad about this fucking game. You see devs trying to shit on this game, journalists, it's because this is messing with their fucking money. Wouldn't that be a sign of a genuinely good game? If cultures are far more into gaming or having a positive reviews about said culture, wouldn't that suggest it's actually good? Yeah, sure.
Of success in the games industry nowadays. So I want to tell you a bit about the game, starting with a basic overview and then my thoughts and impressions from what I've seen so far. Now, if you didn't know, Black Myth Wukong is a fairly linear action-adventure boss rush game that tells the mythological Chinese tale of Journey to the West. You play as the Destined One, traversing the lands, meeting intriguing characters, and eliminating any foes in your path, of which there are plenty. Combat amounts to alternating combos of light and heavy attacks with stances, mixing up your moveset and potential, along with a range of abilities that you unlock as you play. The first skill that you get is this incredibly useful freeze that immobilizes any enemy, including bosses, for a few seconds, letting you chip away at their health. As for defense, it is mostly all about dodging, with perfectly timed evades being heavily rewarded. You eventually also unlock a parry in the form of this stone form ability, giving you another defensive option, but there is no blocking. Really, you're just dodging all incoming attacks. And then beyond your basic attacks and the handful of skills that you got, there are the transformations. Now, initially, you can turn into this pole arm wielding wolf, dishing out loads of fire damage until either his health or energy meter depletes and you transform back. And then you also have these spirits of rare enemies that you capture that can be bound to you and summoned periodically. These will have some sort of a passive effect.
That's the headbang that I did.
Increasing either offensive, defensive, or your utility.
Damn, man, that thing sucks. No wonder he doesn't use that. Wow. Do you see that did like no damage? Jesus.
This active ability where you temporarily, for a brief second, transform into a creature and do some specifically unique variety of attack for that spirit. And with all of these tools in place, what you're doing is moving through these mostly linear environments, taking on groups of basic enemies and bosses, lots and lots of bosses. But before I go into further detail, let me tell you about the boss of today's video. Today's video is sponsored by Guild Wars 2, a free-to-start MMO
They've been,
that for
putting
me
a lot of
has always been
advertisements out
about
recently.
World exploration and discovery.
Did they do a big
coupled with
update
its
for
mostly
Guild Wars 2?
horizontal progression system, this is a big part of what's kept me coming back. I never feel far behind or like I need to grind for weeks. I can just jump back in, play for a while, and check out the latest content. Speaking of which, they recently released the Janthier Wilds expansion on August 20th. This 5th expansion brings players to the fabled Isles of Janthier in pursuit of new adventures and rewards. In terms of the new stuff, well, there's a new weapon for all professions, the two-handed spear. Initially, this was exclusively an underwater weapon. Well, there's now a land version coupled with its own unique skills for every class. They've added a housing system, homesteads, an account-wide personal
game looks
instance
a lot better
with a
than it did
structure
when
and
it first
land
came
for you
out.
to decorate and cultivate. They've also updated the Warclaw mount acquisition method, giving it its own mastery line. There's new challenging and cooperative content with 3 new open-world explorable maps, convergences, these 50-player events, and a new raid with challenge mode. There's a new fractal dungeon with its own challenge mode, and Wizard's Vault rewards. If you're interested in checking it out for yourself, you can use my link in the video description below. All right, so at the top, I called this a boss rush game, and that's mainly because there are bosses literally everywhere. It seems you can't turn a corner without stumbling into another boss in this game. There may very well be as many bosses as there are regular enemies. That's probably not actually the case, but honestly, it feels that way at times.
It's pretty fucking close.
Because you are just fighting bosses constantly. Now, from what I've seen so far, these have all been really cool looking with interesting mechanics and just genuinely fun fights. The difficulty varies for the most part. I would say it's on the easier side as I have one-shot most of the small and medium bosses, but the larger, more major fights, those kind of ramp the challenge up a little bit more, and those have taken me a few attempts in some instances. I think what I've liked the most about it, though, is just all of the variety. I think with one exception, I have not actually seen a repeated boss type, and even the one repeat I did see had a lot that was different about it as well. Playing for about 10 hours yesterday, I have come across 25
classic
of the game's 90 total bosses, and everyone that I've seen, once again, has been unique.
This is the one that I'm on right now.
In how they look, but also in their movesets, in their phases, their abilities, just everything about them. We've got 90 bosses in this game. I've seen 25 of them so far, and already I've been pretty impressed with what I have seen. So basically, the gist of the game is you're using this action combat, you're moving through what are mostly linear levels with branching sections, and it branches further.
That's been probably my biggest criticism with the game, is that I wish there was more things that I could do that would be like exploration type content. I like open world level games, and I know that other people don't like them, but like I do. I like them more.
It's more
like mini dungeons, stuff like that,
from the first to second
and it's
chapter.
not like there aren't any,
enemies,
by the way.
You're
there are
collecting
some
resources as well as items that are hidden in the environment, and you are constantly engaging in boss fights. Now, in the process of you doing all of this, you're also going to be working on your character and power progression, and there's a lot of this. For one, as you level up, you gain sparks. You can also find these at certain points in the world, and these are used to improve just about everything for your character. What essentially amounts to a skill tree is broken up into 6 main categories with further subsections in many of them. First, there are the foundation abilities. These include your stamina, your martial arts, which is your basic combat, as well as your survival. Then there are the 3 staff stances of smash, pillar, and thrust.
I thought they have
there
a journal or something that works like a map. I'm not sure though.
Alteration and strand. And then there are your transformations. So in each of these categories are numerous improvements. Some of these categories have over 100 different individual improvements that you can invest in. And broadly speaking, these will do things like granting a variety of passive boost, allowing you to unlock new abilities and combos, and just opening up your potential moveset, adding more variety to the combat, but then also enhancing the things that you have as a baseline. Just everything.
The leveling system for this game is what the leveling system for Final Fantasy 16 should have been.
Thing across the board is about making you stronger, and then mostly what you're doing is deciding how and what you want to prioritize. If you want to be more defensive, if you want to be more offensive, if you want to focus on stamina or health, if you want to boost your crit, if you want to focus on a specific school of basically those staff stances or like schools of combat of martial arts. Do you want to focus on one of them? Do you want to spread them out amongst the 3 stances? It's really up to you, and the game lets you actually freely respec whenever you want. So you'll accumulate points, you'll spend them in a direction, but then you can freely, and as many times as you want from what I can see, respec and try out new builds.
I'm actually really glad to see more games taking this approach rather than locking you into a certain type of gameplay. I feel like there's been this like really antiquated version of expectation that everything that you would do would just have to be, you'd have to be locked into it, and you needed to like pay money to respec or to change your talents. But like, why actually do you have to do that? There's no reason why you have to. This is a created problem. It's so antiquated.
As you keep
to
playing.
Feel the rate
but
of choice.
That is just the spark system and the skill tree. There is a lot more to progression and improvement. So as you move through the chapters, you also unlock what are called relics that grant boost. Completing the very first chapter gives you the Craving Eyes. This has 3 options to pick from. I went with the increased critical strike damage. There's also armor sets and weapon upgrades.
You can change those even later on in the game too.
You unlock these by defeating bosses and progressing through the story. They will cost materials and some currency to craft, and then you can equip them, and everything comes with its own unique perks. In fact, gear pieces can have individual boost per piece of gear, along with also having set bonuses, and all of this will be for tailoring to different playstyles or for enhancing certain abilities. There are weapon upgrades that will come with their own bonus effects on top of the further upgrades dealing more damage or adding more crits. There's other equipment, which includes these curios. Just think charms.
Yeah, it's like a lot of this mechanic is just, a lot of this is all just Elden Ring, you know?
Their own unique effects. There's also a spot for selecting the spirit of your choice from the ones that you've captured. These spirits can also be leveled up. If you have one that you really like using, you can make it more powerful, make it cost less resource. And then there's another spot for what are called vessels. The one that I've unlocked thus far gives me like a fire debuff resistance. The game also has a bunch of different consumables. You will craft or find these, and they'll grant increased defenses, resistances, or offense, like increasing your damage.
This is the type of difficulty that I think games need to have. Is that I guarantee you later on, especially towards the end of this game, there's probably going to be a handful of bosses that are actually pretty hard. And so, like, you have tools to make the game easier for you, but I bet at least a majority of those, like, really hard bosses might even be optional. And I know that's what, like, Elden Ring did. If you think about all of the really hard bosses in Elden Ring, almost all of them are optional. Like Deathrite Bird, Commander Nile, I think, is also optional. Melania is optional. Like, if you just go through the story, you don't have to fight any of the crazy, crazy hard bosses. Yeah, Moog is optional. The Demon of Hatred is optional in Sekiro.
The
Deathrite one is hard.
You also have this healing ability that refills anytime
I think
you
the
rest
final
at a
version
shrine.
is.
It is called the Gourd. You start off with the coconut wine version, which will heal you for 33% of your health whenever you use it. But then later on, you find more, like the Lamb Brew, which heals you for a flat 20%, but then an additional 25% heal over time. And these can be upgraded as you progress, granting more uses or better healing. And then there's also a slot within those for what are called soaks, smokes, giving you additional benefits for whatever particular gourd that you're using. So this can increase your resistances, add damage reduction, have you gain more health when you use it, or make things like certain spells free to cast for a duration. They also make use of a key system where as you're progressing, you'll come across locked areas, and then you will have to find the keys, usually via defeating a boss, to allow you to progress past that previously locked area. So that is the basic overview. That's like the
Pretty
general
simple.
gist of Black Myth Wukong. You move through these levels, you fight basic enemies, you collect stuff, you fight bosses. There are some branching paths, there's a bit of exploration, there are locked gates which you have to find the keys through, and that's how the game works. That's the general kind of flow of the game. I've seen it compared to Neo. It reminds me a lot of God of War. The only kind of Souls-like reference is the fact that there are shrines that sort of work like bonfires. You can fast travel to them, you do some of your progression and upgrading there, and then also whenever you rest, refilling your health and your mana and your stamina, it also respawns enemies. But that's really
I feel like this is also like a lot of games had stuff like this before like Dark Souls. Like, it's not like Dark Souls invented a lot of this. It's just that Dark Souls was really popular. And so people just are like, yeah, everything like that is Dark Souls.
Only Souls-like equivalent that the game has, because the combat is kind of just much more like a modern day action game, a la God of War, or again, I see Neo referenced quite a lot, but I haven't played Neo yet. So yeah, that's the overview. What about my thoughts? Well, I gotta say, just right baseline, I am quite impressed with the game so far, and I've only played it for a day. I can absolutely, though, see why it's doing so well. So for starters, the production value is very, very high. So it looks fantastic visually. This is a gorgeous game. The first chapter alone really hooked me, traversing these winding paths through this kind of darker, heavily forested mountainside region. That setting alone I love, but it was just made all the better with how good it looks. Just like everything about the visuals, the lighting, the effects, the fidelity of it all. It's a very pretty looking game. And then also the enemy and character design I think is great. From the
they have different bosses too, or like different enemies. I think this is another big problem that like games have, is that, like, for example, Dragon's Dogma 2 had this issue where, like, once you played the game for like 10 hours, you've pretty much encountered every single type of enemy you're going to encounter for the entire game. You know, you fought a Chimera, you fought a Cyclops, you fought a Goblin, you fought another Goblin, you fought a third Goblin, you fought a Goblin with an armor helmet, and then that's basically the whole game. Oh, and then the Saurians.
One who you are playing to all of the enemies and bosses you encounter. I just think they did a good job here. They really delivered a kind of this interesting presentation of these creatures from Chinese mythology. I mean, not only their look, but like the outfits they're wearing, the stuff that you're wearing, your armor sets and weapons, just all of the design to the characters and the setting. It's all really well done. I would say as well, along those same lines, it's just nice to get this sort of relatively novel setting and story. While we have
I think that's another really big component, is that a lot of people, especially like Western players, are pretty used to seeing Western mythology reflected in stories, right? Or like Greek mythology reflected in stories. And I think it's good to see, you know, Chinese mythology too, because for no other reason than it's something different. It's just something new.
Handful of successful games in Eastern settings in recent years. We get so few of them that really lean heavily into the mythological and popular folklore of the region. And I love this. Like, everything about the developers' take on the Journey to the West story is really neat to see in action. It's neat to play through this world and see these mythological creatures and fight these bosses. Also, for how good everything looks, I was pretty impressed with the performance. I would say about 95% of the time the game
I had some frame rate slowdowns, but I think they were like the first time that I would encounter an area, and then after that it would get better.
Run flawlessly for me at 144 frames per second at a 2K resolution. Although I will add, there were a handful of moments in my playthrough with substantial issues. There were a few sections as I was playing where I would see the frame rate drop from like 144 down to 20 all of a sudden. Now, in those instances, this would last anywhere from like 10 to 15 seconds before smoothing out again. I'm not sure if it was an issue with shaders or if the game was loading in new areas while I was running around.
It was probably shaders.
I have heard that there have been some potential potential conflicts and issues with Intel CPUs. So maybe that's what was going on. Frankly, I don't know exactly. But again, mostly at least 95, it's probably closer to 99% of the total playtime. It ran amazingly, flawlessly, but with those few noticeable exceptions. Oh, and also the whole thing is very polished. It's just crisp and clean across the board. The animations of the movement, attacks, the spells, the enemies. There's all sorts of little flourishes, like how your character spins his staff or jumps over the terrain or moves in the environment.
Well, there's another thing too about this that's like it has a certain degree of anime quality that like Elden Ring has too, where like combat, whenever you do like a parry or something like that, or you do an air attack, it feels like you're in an anime. And I think that's what matters a lot, right? Like is just like the way that it feels to play the game, right? You feel like a badass. It feels cinematic. Yeah, exactly. It's so simple, but it's so
the
obvious.
lighting and the sounds. There's just like across the board, there's a high degree of polish and a real lack of jank in this game. I couldn't believe just how well it played and how good it looked and how polished everything was. It just feels like a very complete and well done game. And then finally, the combat. It's simple, but it's quite fun. Boss variety, as I mentioned earlier, has been nice, even though I've only seen 25 of the 90 bosses. They've all been varied and interesting.
Yeah, he's got about as far as I have.
And while I think the game might be a tad on the easier side overall, I would say that there's still enough challenge to make most of the more challenging fights feel satisfying, and even some of the
I don't think that it's easy at all, by the way. I think that Force has beaten every single Souls game probably multiple times. It's like you that should not be your barometer. Your barometer should not be a person who has beaten every single action combat game in the last 10 years.
Basic encounters, like if you're not paying proper attention, you can
card later on. Yeah, of course it does.
Lose an encounter and then find yourself resurrecting back at one of the shrines. And all that is well and good, but I really think the cherry on top here is that this is just a plain old no BS game. It's a single player title with roughly 25 to 50 hours of content, depending on how completionist you want to be. I guess it's 25 for a straight, simple playthrough, but 50 if you're going to be collecting and picking up a lot of the side stuff. And it's got an upfront box price, and that's all. There is no in-game store. There are no premium currencies, no microtransactions, and no battle passes. You just buy the game, you play the game, you enjoy the game, and you stop when you're done. No predatory manipulation to try to squeeze more money out of you along the way. And that, coupled with everything else that I mentioned, with it being a great-looking game, a cool and novel setting, good performance, and the fact that it's fun to play, and that it's all polished and feels like just a finished product, like I'm paying for something that was fully realized and done when I got my hands on it.
Yeah, you're buying a feature complete game. This is a term, feature complete. This is an ancient term. I think it was from the Sumerian or Aramaic language, and it was removed from our vocabulary somewhere around I'd say like 2007.
That is absolutely why the game is doing so very
long time ago.
2.3 million concurrent players, nearly 200,000 overwhelmingly positive reviews with a 96% rating. That is crazy. Now, unsurprisingly, a big part of the game's success comes from its popularity in China, where it looks to be getting loads of play. That is unsurprising because, well, like I said, from what I've seen so far, it looks like a genuinely solid game, and the game is based on a beloved story from Chinese mythology. So yes, it makes sense that it's doing well over there. But in the discussions about this, I've seen people using its popularity in China almost as a way to write off the game's success, to write off its high player count and its positive ratings, as if the Chinese players don't count.
It's like they speak they speak another language, so like what are their video games like gonna be different? Like, what do you mean? Like, what? You realize, like, I bet in China they like Elden Ring. I bet in Russia they like it. I bet if you go down to Brazil, like, a lot of them like Elden Ring. What are you even talking about? Like,
but also, I think we should keep in mind plenty of other of the most successful games, of massively popular games, had a lot of their success due in part to their popularity in China as well.
PUBG.
This isn't the first game to be popular in China that was just popular overall. And really, my take on this situation and this game in general is that, yes, it does seem to be a game that is clearly massively popular in China, but also one that has global appeal because it's a good game. Like, it may be more
It's the same thing as the Honkai Star Rail and Zenless Zone 2. Like, Star Rail has a lot of I think has a lot of like Chinese mythology, and like also the Wuthering Waves has Chinese mythology that's woven into it as well. But does anybody really give a fuck? No, like, because the game plays well, right? Like, nobody really cares about where a game comes from. Like, they could make a game from like Dubai or a game from Madagascar and it's really good and everybody's gonna play it. Like, nobody thinks about this. Yeah, too much in Wuthering Waves. You're right, actually. You're very right. There's like Lin Jen, Lin Ken, Lin Win. It's like, oh my God. And it's like, I get it, right? Because like if I was Chinese and there's John, Jacob, Jeff, James, I would be like, wait, what? Oh, fuck. Oh, fuck. Okay. It's hard. Yeah.
In terms of the raw player numbers than it is in the West over
Red
there,
Long,
but that doesn't make it not popular here. And from what I've seen, from what I've played, I do think Black Myth Wukong is a pretty good game. Now, this isn't a full-on review. I haven't finished the game, and there are some gripes and complaints, you know, for as flawlessly as it ran most of the time. Those times when it did have issues, that sucked. It wasn't great. I like it to be smooth the entire time that I'm playing, even if it's just like 1% hitching, right? But then also, just in general, the game is incredibly linear. Now, the first chapter is like the most linear. As you move into chapter 2, it opens up a bit more. Not in like
chapter 2 didn't feel linear to me. It didn't feel like it was linear, but it didn't feel linear.
Amount of explorable space within a path, but the fact that there are multiple paths that are branching and interconnecting. But I do wish there was more freedom within those areas. So you'll be moving around a play space and there's just a lot of invisible walls everywhere. You can basically just mostly walk on the ground and you can't even go on top of certain buildings. So for example,
to be fair, in Sekiro, it's not that much different. It's just that instead of an invisible wall, you just jump off the edge and you die. So it's not like this is a lot different, but it's kind of the same thing.
There might be a building somewhere and walkable paths all around the building, but even though your character should be able to climb on top of the building, like based on how high they can jump and their moves and everything, the game puts invisible walls that prevent you from doing so.
You're right.
And that kind of thing, I wish they kind of just lifted the restrictions a little bit more. I haven't finished the game. This isn't a thorough review, obviously. I'm just kind of giving you my baseline.
I think that the next game that these guys make could actually be Elden Ring level quality, like on par with Elden Ring. I genuinely believe that. I think that there are only like, so I think Capcom, Rockstar, I think Game Science now, there's like one more that's like really, really good. They can compete with From Software. Larian, yeah, true. And CD Projekt Red, yeah, and maybe Square Enix if they have the right people. I think those are the only devs that can compete on that level of quality. In my opinion, grinding your games too. Yeah, you're right. You're very true. I think I think Path of Exile 2 will be the Elden Ring. It sounds like a games journalist title. I think it will be the Elden Ring of ARPGs. It will be. Like, it will actually be like that. It will be that good.
Impressions and a general overview of Black Myth Wukong. But really the main point is that this game, from what I've played, it generally seems good, surprisingly so. I wasn't expecting much. I was almost not even going to play Black Myth Wukong because I heard it was like a boss rushy game and I just really wasn't in the mood for it this week, but my friend convinced me to do so. And I'm glad I sat down to play it because after the first hour or two, I was hooked, and then I just kept on playing all day, and I had an absolute blast. I haven't finished the game. Again, this is not a full, thorough review, but from what I've seen so far, It's pretty good, and I'm not surprised it's doing as well as it is. I might do a follow-up video later on with some wrapped-up thoughts, but in general, Black Myth Wukong took me by surprise. It's actually a good game. It's a polished game. It plays well. It's fun. It's an interesting setting. Not much else to say, and there's no BS in the game.
No bullshit.
That. Even with all that controversy pre-release about people, streamers not being able to talk about China or radical feminism or COVID. Bottom line, at the end of the day is they have a good game. They have a fun game. They have a complete game, and it's not filled with predatory crap. That's all it takes to make gamers happy. I know it's asking for a lot. That's it for today. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the vid. Have you played Black Myth Wukong? What do you think of the game thus far? Let me know below. Thanks for watching. See you guys next time.
Yep, there it is. Some Asian gamer said the Chinese company wasn't allowed to promote suicide, so they had to put up invisible walls. I don't know if that's the case, but there you go. I think that this is a high-level conspiracy that I have. I think that Black Myth Wukong is going to be more in line with Chinese cultural ideals, because I think the Chinese government was very strongly vested in this game becoming a massive success. So you would see this game reflect Chinese mores and Chinese cultural standards at a higher degree that other games do, because it's such a big deal. That this is a tinfoil hat opinion that I have, but I do have this opinion. So you could very much be right. Big Brother's involved in everything? Yes, but like with this one, I feel like they were even more involved, is what I'm trying to get at, right? And so yeah, no skeletons in the game too. CCP hates skeletons. Yep, there you go. Game Science receives a lot of government support. Yeah, well, it finally fucking worked. Whenever companies here you receive government support, we get games like, what's it called? It's not Dustbin. A Dust Space, Dust thing, like Dust something. I forgot what it was. So yeah, there are skeletons. I haven't seen them. But yeah, it's a good video. He explained a lot of it, but like, I think that there's also a lot of people not talking about the fact that, and people said, by the way, that like From Software isn't on Capcom's level. I feel like Capcom's released a lot of games that are 9s, but I don't think that they've released, like, outside of, I think, Street Fighter 6. Maybe Monster Hunter Iceborne is a 10. Yeah, I mean, but that was like a long time ago. Yeah, Monster Hunter World, yeah, I'd say that's probably a 10. Yeah, probably, that game's probably a 10. But, like, Rise, I feel like Rise probably isn't a 10. I don't think people would say Rise is a 10. I think even fans of the game would say it's not a 10. Yeah, but, I mean, either way, like, that's... I do think that Capcom is, like, on the same level as them.